In the face of the climate crisis, the environment and sustainability are high on the international agenda. In November, the United Nations Climate Change Conference, the so-called COP26, is being held in Glasgow. And the month after, at the World Trade Organization, it'll be holding its 12th Ministerial Conference in Geneva, where trade and sustainability are expected to feature prominently. This is going to include discussions around restrictions on fisheries subsidies, trade in plastics, the circular economy, reform of fossil fuel subsidies, and potentially discussions around liberalisation of environmental goods and services, something I want to discuss a little bit more now. This last option, liberalising trade in environmentally sound green goods, is intended to reduce tariffs on these goods to make environmentally beneficial products like solar panels or wind turbines more accessible and appealing to consumers by reducing their cost. Now, identifying which goods count as green goods is a technically difficult exercise. Do you look at the environmental impact of how the product is made, or do you look at how it's used? Do you treat goods that are used for both environmental and non-environmental purposes in the same way? And the technical challenges don't stop there. The structure of tariff commitments at the WTO through so-called goods schedules doesn't really customarily allow for distinguishing products by how they're made or distinguishing certain types of environmental goods. And so you have to create small additional categories, so-called X-outs. It's not an insurmountable task, but it's one that adds an additional layer of complexity. And then finally, perhaps most importantly, the political challenges of liberalising trade in any type of good, and environmental goods are included in that category. Because for every tariff you might want to reduce, your government might be pressured from an industry back home that isn't going to welcome the increased competition it's going to face when tariffs are reduced. Now, liberalisation on environmental goods has been actually on the radar for quite a long time. The OECD put together a methodology and a list for environmental goods back in the late 90s, mid to late 90s, and a group of WTO members in the Asia Pacific built on this, the so-called APEC list created for environmental goods, and this serves as a really useful starting point for discussions at the WTO. In 2001, the Doha Ministerial Declaration set out a mandate for negotiations on environmental goods in particular, and the plan was for an environmental goods agreement that would eliminate tariffs on a wide range of environmentally sound products. And talks were quite productive for a good period of time, but they stalled back in 2016, and it feels like things have slowed down quite a lot since then. Nonetheless, there has been movement. So a group of 5 countries, Costa Rica, Fiji, Iceland, New Zealand, Norway and Switzerland, have been negotiating amongst themselves on something, the Agreement on Climate Change, Trade and Sustainability. Part of that set of issues is liberalisation of environmental goods and services also. There are other approaches and other headway where it's been made. So the UK, for example, having to set out on withdrawal from the EU its independent tariff regime, chose to liberalise trade on a wide range of environmental goods. So around 2/3 of products that would be covered by the Environmental Goods Agreement were it concluded at the WTO are liberalised under the UK's unilateral tariff regime. Now, commentators don't expect a revival of the Environmental Goods Agreement anytime soon, and certainly not a MC12 coming up, but there is hope that there might be a call to restart in earnest negotiations, and perhaps not just in goods, but also in services. Optimistically, we might hope that the collective action of some members, like those ACCTS countries, and the unilateral action of others, like the UK, might give hope that there is will to encourage progress at the WTO. Whether that, of course, will be fast enough to contribute to global efforts to combat climate change is another matter.